Intelligence got multiplied, fear divided. The whole wasn't just greater than the sum of its parts. It was smarter and braver too. So, Commander Rich Davis wasn't just hoping they'd flip the switch that evening. He was banking on it. More than any other skill, he explains, SEALs rely on this merger of consciousness. Being able to flip that switch, that's the real secret to being a SEAL. For us ordinary civilians, this can happen just the same. I remember when I was a kid, it drove my dad nuts when he called my name and I just didn't react because I was completely immersed in a book. So when you dive into a story, reading a book, this is also a flow state. It can also happen when you watch a movie. You forget everything around you, all your worries. It can help you distract yourself from something that is stressing you out. Autistic people actually do that with focusing on their special interest. That's how they get out of feeling stressed. Merging with something that is beyond the ordinary state of consciousness, and therefore called non-ordinary state of consciousness by Stanislav Grof. You can also have that doing art or sports or meditation. There are so many ways to tap into that. And everybody can do it. This state might help them focus, might help them merge. Donna Williams has written about this, the state of merging. When you pull out of the chatter brain, the little self, when you shift your perception. The Greeks had a word for this merger that Davis quite liked, ecstasis, the act of stepping beyond oneself. Davis had his own word as well. He called it the switch. The moment they stopped being separate men with lives and wives and things that matter. That's the identity of the left hemisphere. The moment they became, well, there's no easy way to explain it, but something happened out there. Plato described ecstasis as an altered state where our normal waking consciousness vanishes completely, replaced by an intense euphoria and a powerful connection to a greater intelligence. Jill Bolte Taylor, in her famous TED Talk of her left hemisphere stroke, she described that state as well. Euphoria, you hear her say. Nirvana. It is bliss. you are in a being state. And your identity, the person you are, it dissolves. It's no longer that important. Anxiety, worry, all of that stress just disappears, evaporates. And it's so recharging, restful, and beautiful to be in such a state. It's like taking a vacation from life. Put all these experiences together, and it's beginning to seem like a Promethean uprising. Advances in science and technology are giving us unprecedented access to and insight about the upper range of human experience, arguably the most controversial and misunderstood territory in history. Around the world, revelers, soldiers, scientists, artists, entrepreneurs, technologists, and business leaders are leveraging these insights for a common goal, a glimpse above the clouds. First in isolation, then in increasing numbers, and now, if you know where to look, virtually everywhere. The case for ecstasies. The alternative is unconsciousness, the default setting, the rat race, the constant gnawing sense of having had and lost some infinite thing. David Foster Wallace. When we say ecstasies, we are talking about a very specific range of non-ordinary states of consciousness, NOSC. What Johns Hopkins psychiatrist Stanislav Grof defined as those experiences characterized by dramatic perceptual changes, intense and often unusual emotions, profound alterations in the thought processes and behavior, brought about by a variety of psychosomatic manifestations. Historically, if you wanted to use meditation to consistently produce a state where the self vanished, decades of practice were required. Why? Because your target was nothing more than a peculiar sensation, and hitting it was like throwing darts blindfolded. But researchers now know that the center of that target actually correlates to changes in brain function, like brainwaves in the low alpha, high theta range. And this unlocks all kinds of new training options. Instead of following the breath or chanting a mantra or puzzling out a koan, meditators can be hooked up to neurofeedback devices that steer the brain directly toward that alpha theta range. It's a fairly straightforward adjustment to electronical activity, but it can accelerate learning, letting practitioners achieve in months what used to take years. Flow states have been typically associated with artists and athletes. Contemplative and mystical states belonged to seekers and saints, and psychedelic states were mostly sampled by hippies and ravers. But over the past decade, thanks to advances in brain science, we've been able to pull back the curtain and discover that these seemingly unrelated phenomena share remarkable neurobiological similarities. The seals have been iterating on Lily's original technology, working with researchers at Advanced Brain Monitoring. In Carlsbad, California, they've hotwired neural and cardiac feedback loops, digital displays, and high-fidelity sound into the experience. They're deploying these upgrades for a practical purpose: accelerated learning, by using the tanks to eliminate all distraction and train specific brainwaves and regulate heart rate frequency. The seals are able to cut the time it takes to learn a foreign language from 6 months to 6 weeks. For a specialized unit deployed across 5 continents, shutting off the self to accelerate learning has become a strategic imperative.
He had something to share. He was rejected. He had to show them that
his very presence on screen is a protest.
You still think of yourself Chinese, or do you ever think of yourself as North American?
You know what? I want to think of myself as a human being.
His philosophy was one of self-actualization.
Be formless, shapeless, like water. Water can flow, or it can crash. Be water, my friend.
Philosophy of flow. Hence, the famous opening of the Tao Te Ching goes like this. The Tao that can be described is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be spoken is not the eternal name. End quote. So, what knowledge is available about the Tao? Well, the Taoist philosophers emphasize over and over again that the true Tao is an all-encompassing force that is beyond our comprehension and cannot be perceived by the senses. And even though we can never grasp the true Tao, the goal is to live in agreement with it, which is strikingly similar to the Stoic approach to nature. So, how do we live in harmony with the WuWei? Taoist literature doesn't really give one practical method to achieve this. However, we can find many clues that point to achieving stillness of mind, curbing the senses, being humble, and the cessation of striving in order to open ourselves up to the workings of the universe. This stillness of mind doesn't necessarily mean that we sit down somewhere with our eyes closed. The Taoists observe that stillness of mind can be combined with action, and if we are completely in the present moment, our actions will go effortlessly, without friction, and accompanied by a razor-sharp focus. So much so that it's almost ecstatic. In his biography, retired professional basketball player Bill Russell writes, "It was almost as if we were playing in slow motion. During those spells, I could almost sense how the next play would develop and where the next shot would be taken." End quote. The Taoist work Zhuangzi contains a story about a cook named Ting who engages in his work while in a state of flow. This grasped the attention of Lord Wenhui, who was amazed about how elegantly the cook cut up oxen. When he commented him on his skill, Cook Ting laid down his knife and replied, "What I care about is the way, which goes beyond skill. When I first began cutting up oxen, all I could see was the ox itself. After 3 years, I no longer saw the whole ox. And now I go at it by spirit and don't look with my eyes. Perception and understanding have come to stop, and spirit moves where it wants. I go along with the natural makeup, strike in the big hollows, guide the knife through the big openings, and following things as they are. So I never touch the smallest ligament or tendon, much less a main joint. That which offers no resistance overcomes the hardest substances. That which offers no resistance can enter where there is no space. Few in the world can comprehend the teaching without words or understand the value of non-action." Lao Tzu.
We have known about the relationship between flow and peak performance for more than a century, but A real understanding of this relationship has been slow in coming. The main problem was conflicting motivations. The people really good at finding flow, mostly artists and athletes, were rarely interested in studying it, and the people interested in studying flow, primarily academics, were rarely good at finding it. Defined as an optimal state of consciousness where we feel our best and perform our best. Flow refers to those in the zone. Moments where focus gets so intense that everything else disappears. Action and awareness start to merge. Our sense of self vanishes. As soon as we are out of it, we pass into delightful meadows, where the purest air is breathed, where sacred concerts and discourses are heard, where, in short, one is impressed with celestial visions. By sunup, those visions had faded, replaced by repercussions in the real world. The idea that non-ordinary states of consciousness could improve performance was spreading out of the extreme and into the mainstream. But what caught our attention were the conversations we were having after those presentations. On too many occasions to count, people would pull us aside to tell us about their clandestine experiments with ecstatic technologies. We met military officers going on months-long meditation retreats, Wall Street traders zapping their brains with electrodes, trial lawyers stacking off prescription pharmaceuticals, famous tech founders visiting transformational festivals, and teams of engineers microdosing with psychedelics. In other words, everywhere we went, someone was trying to steal the kaikyon. We've been quietly seeking the same thing. The boost in information and inspiration that altered states provide. They are deliberately cultivating these states to solve critical challenges and outperform their competition. It isn't just grit or better habits or longer hours that are separating the best from the rest. To hear these trailblazers tell it, the insights they receive in those states are what make all the difference. And unlike in earlier, more guarded eras, today they're openly talking about their adventures. The ecstatics are coming out of the closet. The conscious mind is a potent tool, but it's slow and can manage only a small amount of information at once. The subconscious, meanwhile, is far more efficient. It can process more data in much shorter time frames. In ecstasies, the conscious mind takes a break, and the subconscious takes over. As it occurs, a number of performance-enhancing neurochemicals flood the system, including norepinephrine and dopamine. Both of these chemicals amplify focus, muscle reaction times, and pattern recognition. Regular waking consciousness has a predictable and consistent signature in the brain, widespread activity in the prefrontal cortex, brainwaves in the high-frequency beta range, and the steady drip of stress chemicals like norepinephrine and cortisol. During the states we're describing, this signature shifts markedly. Instead of widespread activity in the prefrontal cortex, we see specific parts of this region either light up and become hyperactive or power down and become hypoactive. At the same time, brainwaves slow from agitated beta to daydreamy alpha and deeper theta. Neurochemically, stress chemicals like norepinephrine and cortisol are replaced by performance-enhancing, pleasure-producing compounds such as dopamine, endorphins, anandamide, serotonin, and oxytocin. So no matter how varied these states appear on the surface, their underlying neurobiological mechanisms, that is, the knobs and levers being tweaked in the brain, are the same. First, we doubled the amount of cash and coin people spend each year trying to get out of their heads the altered state's economy. And we didn't mean this metaphorically, we meant it literally. Getting out of our heads requires a precise biological signature in the brain, specifically a slowdown in neuroelectrical activity, a deactivation of the network that supports self-consciousness, and the presence of at least a couple of the big 6 neurochemicals we mentioned earlier. If an experience produces this signature, then we could credibly include it in our tally. With neurobiology as our filter, we were able to spot similarities between otherwise disparate experiences. We assessed therapeutic and personal development programs designed to get out of my head and help me feel happier, from psychological and psychiatric counseling to the massive online self-help market. We also considered a wide range of high-flow pursuits like action sports, video games, and gambling. That is, activities that are primarily engaged for intrinsic reward rather than external recognition. Then we look at a conservative approach to the broader categories of media and entertainment. While one could argue, for example, that much of the live music industry affects a desire for state-changing collective experience, we zeroed in on an ascendant and uniquely qualified genre: electronic dance music. In EDM, leading DJs earn 8 figures a year for showing up in a club and pressing play on a laptop. So it's not about the appeal of the band. There isn't one. And it's not about the lyrics either. There aren't any. What is it about? Thunderous bass, tightly synchronized light shows, and typically lots of mind-altering substances. Other than the state shift it produces, there is little reason to seek out the experience. and those states have become increasingly popular. The altered state economy totals out to roughly $4 trillion a year. That's a sizable chunk of our income that we annually spend to the Church of the Ecstatic. We spend more on this than we do on maternity care, humanitarian aid, and K-12 education combined. It's larger than the gross national product of Britain, India, or Russia. And to really put this in perspective, it's twice as many dollars as there are known galaxies in the entire universe. So, even though much of our seeking is haphazard and often counterproductive, this $4 trillion total stands as a pretty good metric for how badly we want to get out of our heads and how much we're willing to spend for even a shot at relief.
This is something that's really important, is you could try mindfulness in a sort of roundabout way. So you could try doing flow activities. So he came up with this idea of flow and psychological flow. And I've talked about it a few times in terms of mental health, and then realised myself that I wasn't doing it. So it's good for everybody's mental health, but it might be a better way for you to do it and do mindfulness as an autistic individual. Cultivating flow as a mental habit of happiness. And it's something that I've been advising to lots of people and then realised I wasn't really doing it myself. And it's very individual. So for me, you can see my piano here. So for me, I get flow when I'm playing French piano music, classical music, so Chopin, Debussy. A friend who I met for dinner last night, she gets flow when she's running. That for me would not give me flow at all. It would have the exact opposite effect on me. But lots of people I know do get it with flow, do get it with running. Jack's experiencing it at the moment with chess. Again, that would not work for me. He starts to explain chess to me and I'm like, it's the opposite of flow. So really it is a very personal thing, and taking the time to realise what your flow activity is. Another one for me is reading journal articles, autism journal articles, which some people would think that was strange. Linda Buchanan might also experience that. So I love sitting there with my highlighter pen and my journal article. Printed copy, it's got to be, not on my screen, and I'm highlighting. But it could be your Kindle, it could be knitting, could be doing any activity like that. So that the key factors are that it's got to be something that absorbs you, that it's not so easy that you don't have to really think about it, but not so hard that it puts you off. So that's where the chess kind of falls down for me. So it's a mental state of being where you are completely absorbed or in the zone. That lovely feeling that you get where you stop thinking about your emails or what you need to do. So I realised that my mental health was going a bit off kilter, working too hard. So I realised I needed to factor in somewhere swimming. So I'm restarted that a couple of times a week, and that works for me. So somewhere about 15 minutes in, I stopped thinking about my emails or what I've got to do. So it's more likely to be experienced when the activity is neither too demanding or too easy, and where there are clear goals and feedback. So it could be playing an instrument. Interestingly, we quite often worry, or I get reports of carers worrying about their autistic family members gaming too much, but actually you could be experiencing flow whilst you're gaming. So, sometimes we do worry about things that perhaps we don't need to.
I will be just in an amazing state of flow where I am not putting in any effort at all, and it's just coming out naturally, and I'm being hyper productive, getting a week's worth of work done in a day or even in an afternoon. And I don't always have control over if that happens or when that happens. But I do spend a significant amount of my time trying to figure out what are the situations that allow me to get into this state of flow. Because when I can, then everything works well. And when I can't, it is the most frustrating thing in the world. So what I've noticed is that there are a lot of things that can be distracting. So when I'm talking to a camera, for example, even just looking at the camera can cause me to lose my train of thought. And if I lose the train of thought, well, I'm not really building up any momentum, am I? So sometimes, ironically, having notes, having prepared, sometimes the more I prepare for something, the less likely I am to be able to get into a state of flow and to actually be productive and perform at all, because my brain will be thinking about all of the points that I've prepared and all of the practice that I've done. And that actually, ironically, takes my focus away from the actual task of presenting, the task of performing. I used to play the drums and do lots of musical performances. And what I found is I had to practice so much, practice the same thing 100 times, 1,000 times, until it was absolutely 100% ingrained into the back of my memory, so that I didn't have to think about it at all. And unless I was that practiced, then I was not able to perform, because I would distract myself. I would try to read the music and it just wouldn't work, or I would miss a beat or something. And it was really easy to throw me off unless it was so well ingrained that it was literally almost like second nature. So when I'm teaching teachers with professional development around autism, I share something about my learning curve. And the point of the lesson that I'm sharing with that is that if I'm not good at something, then it takes a huge amount of energy and I generally perform very poorly. And if I put in my 1,000 hours to get good at something, then I am extremely good at that one thing. And partly this goes a long way to explain why a lot of autistic people have a special interest, or at least restricted interests and restricted skills in certain areas. Because if you're anything like me, then doing the things that you're really good at is really fun. It's really nice. It feels amazing to sit down and be hyper productive for an afternoon, right? That feels great.
In the midst of civilization, with its noise and its temptation, it is easy to find evil. That is why I love the mountains, the rivers, and the lonely valleys, the oceans, all that reminds one of the lost Eden, and which humanity has worked to destroy. Man finds his best within, the peace of nature. Man was created to live among the trees, the wild birds, warmed by the sun, inspired by the stars, voyaging through mountains and forests. We have to find ourselves within nature. This is the answer that I have found. Mysticism is to search for the light and love of God.
Our legal system and our society doesn't like to see people using a plant that produces within them the sense of God. That allows them to escape all of the hierarchies that are inherent in a church. It produces, again, a diametrically opposed model for how knowledge is supposed to come to a person.
The day men denied the God of love, of light, and of peace, who sustains the universe, they denied their greater self, and they plunged into a fog. Nevertheless, there have been men of such ignorance and blindness that they made war in the name of religion. What absurd logic! They worshipped bloody and cruel gods in lieu of worshipping the one true God of love. Within the spirit of each man there glows a spark of divine light, which, when allowed, will radiate love and understanding. It is our mystical essence.
With the entheogens, there's definitely an effort here, I think, to overcome limitations that are inherent in the human mind. There's one theory that the mind is essentially a reducing valve. And so what we do is we sit here in our normal lives, and there's so much buzzing, hum, and complexity to everything that's going on in the cosmos that our consciousness has to filter that down and give us what we need to know in order to survive. Entheogens allow us to at least shift that reducing valve, and in some cases open it wider so that more information comes down. Reality can kind of be downloaded in larger chunks in a higher bandwidth.
The Mazatec culture remained intact, not by fighting, but by taking to heart doctrine that coincided with their own. Over millennia, the ancient Mazatec people had long cultivated a shamanic healing rite using a visionary mushroom to seek the divine. Named the Nindi Shito for the little ones who spring forth, the Mazatec shaman and healer used the power of this mushroom to speak to deities of the underworld and to seek advice on ailments affecting the physical, emotional, and spiritual.
My direct encounter with the world of the magic of the sacred mushrooms, Daoists, made me feel the spirit within, and then God. Thanks to the state of mind produced by Daoists, I recognize the great lie in which we live when we separate ourselves from nature and from God. Human society is blind and lost in a maze of egoism and material ambition. People simply forget their self and forget God, just to pursue material success. In order to find our mystical essence, it becomes necessary to live alone and to leave the crowd, to leave civilization behind, and to find the truth within nature. Civilized life leads us away from God. Through the sacred mushrooms, I understood that God exists, that the spirit within man is immortal and forever. This understanding led me away from man and led me to live a solitary life. It is very few who truly accept that the spirit is eternal, that it will survive our physical death, and that our true essence is spiritual and eternal. In other words, to live forever. We are cosmic voyagers, spirits that have been here, in one form or another, since the day that creation began. We have been stones, plants, trees, fish, reptiles, different animals, and men, in other eras of creation. This is not the first time we are here. Only in solitude of my own spirit have I been able to find the light of God. Many will misunderstand because I found this understanding through the sacred mushrooms. But at the same time, they do not know the mushrooms or its proper use. They would become surprised when the mushrooms are mentioned, but they are not troubled when considering alcohol or wars a normal experience. As soon as the holy children are ingested, there is a celebration of the spirit. All sorts of spiritual beings attend the ceremony, relate to the earth, the air, fire, and water. They come to celebrate and to have fun. Our gifts and sacrifices and prayers are in exchange for their goodwill. They are the elements, spirits, who nourish us and virtually keep us alive, since they are children of the Mother Earth. They come to play, and it becomes necessary to receive them with joy, to welcome them, to be aware of their presence, and to acknowledge them. Shamanism knows no bounds, only the restrictions imposed by the mind of the practitioner, because the participants see and feel the things invoked by the shaman. Within the world of magic, there are so many possibilities of events that all the limitations of the physical world are transcended. You can raise the dead or breathe underwater. You can walk on the surface of the sun without feeling pain or burns, or bring the sea to a cabin in the mountains. As soon as the holy children are ingested, there is a celebration of the spirit. All sorts of spiritual beings attend the ceremony, relate to the earth, the air, fire, and water. They come to celebrate and to have fun. Our gifts and sacrifices and prayers are in exchange for their goodwill. They are the elementals, spirits, who nourish us and virtually keep us alive, since they are children of the Mother Earth. They come to play, and it becomes necessary to receive them with joy, to welcome them, to be aware of their presence, and to acknowledge them.